you, Chair. Some of my questions were sort of addressed by the witnesses in response to Senator Ahmed's question, but I still have, I'm going to probe a little further with Mr. Balgord. Balgord. In 2021, your network, the Anti-Hate Network, in partnership with 30 other organizations, provided recommendations to the federal government, including the establishment of an independent body to enforce and audit online hate regulations. Maybe this is the ombudsman you're speaking about. That online hate regulations carry significant financial penalties to compel pro-social behavior from social platforms, and that large platforms be required to leverage their algorithms to detect and proactively remove hate content. Are those recommendations still alive, or have you adjusted them given the way things have evolved?
Those ones that you've listed are, yes, still very much alive and would kind of be captured under the ombudsperson model that we are suggesting. We do have a more kind of up-to-date one-pager on the ombudsperson model that goes into a bit more detail on what we are asking the government to do. I'd be happy to provide that to the clerk.
Please do. Please do. Thank you. That would be very helpful. And my question is, in Canada or outside Canada, is there a proxy for what you're proposing in terms of an ombudsman to deal with hate? I mean, we have an articulated approach in Canada to anti-Semitism. We have I forget what his title is, Irvin Kotler, who 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 has been named. I forget what his title is. Is that what you're looking? Are you looking to uh, replicate some of those approaches?
No, we're looking at a truly new and independent regulator um, that would have the power to do very broad investigations. So they could actually compel evidence and testimony from social media companies, look at the algorithms. They would be a safe space for whistleblowers from those companies to go to, for example. And they could also work collaboratively, right? It can be both a antagonistic and a collaborative approach at the same time. And then having learned what they learned from doing those investigations, issue recommendations to those platforms. I'll just it's not on the topic of hate, but it's an easy example. Let's say that a study finds that young people and especially young women are developing eating disorders because of thin inspiration content on Instagram or TikTok or something, right? Um, we could learn that through this ombudsperson, or they could learn that from external studies also being done and incorporate that information, but then issue the recommendation. Okay, so content that is associated with this kind of subculture, this sub movement that we call it inspiration, um, is not allowed to be promoted into the feeds of persons under the age of 18, for example, right? That could be a tangible recommendation that the ombudsperson could give. And if the companies themselves are unwilling to do it, then the ombudsperson could go to a court and ask for that court to make it an order, where the companies would have to comply with that recommendation once it becomes an order. And then if they do not, then when we talk about those significant monetary penalties, that's when they might be applied. So that's one example of how the model might work.
Thank you. Uh, my next question is possibly to all of you, but particularly to Miss Ahmed, because I noted what you said, that Muslim women in Edmonton, likely all around Canada, hesitate to file charges because nothing comes of these charges, and they're further victimized by the police. The government of Canada has promised to introduce. They introduced C-36 in the last parliament. It died on the order paper, but a version of it will come back, and that will make hate speech a discriminatory practice under the Canadian Human Rights Act, which would mean that victims would have the capacity to file claims under the Canadian Human Rights Act. Um, do you agree with this approach? And what else do you think should be included in federal hate speech legislation?
Thank you so much for the question. I do think that approach does help. I think what's really important is a lot of times even if the laws are there, it comes down to local police enforcement and how they report it or how they're labeling it, and if they view it as as if they view it as a hate crime, because a lot of times that's the first connection that a woman has when she's filing her complaint of like a hate crime that has happened. And a lot of times is when you're dealing with officers and um, they're not sensitive, and they don't understand that it has a greater there's a greater implication of it that kind of causes an issue. We've had a lot of conversations, for instance, locally with the Edmonton police here, and we were discussing how what they can do to kind of help the problem. And one of the things that we were discussing is that anything that comes as a hate crime should be treated with like the white glove approach, for example. It should be the officers need to understand um, the officers need to understand that there is more to it. Like someone could have just said something that is considered a hate. Like, I'm sorry, let me just start over again. I apologize. Um, it's really important that the officers, because that is the first contact that you have, that they're the one, they're really supportive to the victims. Part of the reasons a lot of times that these crimes don't get part of the reason that the crimes a lot of times aren't sentencing doesn't follow through is that um, officers haven't put a lot of information in their notes. They don't have the community impact statements. They don't have the victim impact statements explaining why what happened is a hate crime. But I do think having better laws to protect them helps. But I do think that it's a systematic change that needs to happen, and it has to happen on all levels, right? It has to happen on the federal level, the provincial level, and the local level. Because a lot of times it's hard to tell someone who's been victimized to come tell her story, and then she has to continue telling her story and fight for it. We have to get groups involved to advocate for her, which is what we do a lot of times. Is you have to advocate to even get an officer to come listen to her story. That's where the problem is. The problem is we re-traumatize the victims over and over again when they have to talk about what happened to them. And sometimes when you're talking to someone, and if they don't have the empathy and they're not dealing with you in an empathetic way, you shut down that victim, right? And the biggest issue is we don't have victim services doesn't understand the implications of a hate crime, right? There's not specialized therapists that we offer them in the meanwhile to help them express how they feel. But I do think it's a multi-level approach on all levels, and I do apologize for all the stuttering and everything. I completely apologize for that. But I do thank you for the question. Hopefully I've answered it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ahmed. Perhaps the other two witnesses could weigh in on this proposal that will come to us.
I'm sorry. On you have a proposal coming to you in regards to.
We will have legislation coming to us on hate speech, not online, just hate speech, and it will enable victims, if they don't get heard at the local police force, it will give victims another route to complain to the Canadian Human Rights Commission. But the onus is back on the victims. I reckon, but I still wonder what you would make of this legislative proposal.
If it's anything like Section 13, it would really welcome it. Anything that kind of removes police as being a barrier and allows kind of people to seek some kind of resolution on their own or on behalf of somebody else in their community, we see as welcome. We have heard many stories, just like Citra has heard, about people who try to report to the police and are dismissed, disrespected. It's really awful, and it comes down to a policing culture issue. Dr. Barbara Perry has done a study on many of the police services in Ontario, asking them, including members of the hate crimes units, what they thought of hate crime, what they thought of how they think other police members perceive hate crime, and the general gist of the results is, that police don't take it seriously. They don't care. They don't see it as more important than other crime. So there is just a massive cultural problem within the police that we are very pessimistic about the possibility of addressing it, and believe in finding, as many methods possible for people who are targeted by it to find other routes to positive solutions.
And I would just echo that again to reiterate what everyone has said here around the onus being on the victims, but then what is the multi-level and multi-pronged approaches that can help enhance those pathways so that these things can get addressed in a more effective way. So just again to reiterate what everyone else has shared here.